Hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation of Scott Pilgrim versus the World and how it relates to the course content. This was presented by me, Thomas, and my partner, Stefan.
The film synopsis of the movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World shows a young man named Scott Pilgrim who plays in a garage band with his friends and is dating a young 17-year-old woman named Knives Chow who is still in high school. His family and friends aren't very approving of her, and eventually he has a dream about a woman named Ramona Flowers. He later on meets her in real life, and despite already dating Knives Chow, he begins to develop feelings for Ramona Flowers. He then goes on to date Ramona Flowers, but in order to get her to become his girlfriend, he has to get through her past seven exes who are trying to prevent him from doing so.
So this slide is about self-knowledge and attitudes. There's two types. The first type I'm going to speak about, which is explicit attitude. So explicit attitude is an attitude that is expressed outwardly. So in an example in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, we have Knives Chew, also known as Knives, and her performance. She performed explicit attitude during this performance by verbally showing her excitement towards Scott Pilgrim's band. Her explicit attitudes occur at a conscious level, meaning that the individual performs them intentionally. This is an attitude you were able to tell and be able to recognize. Knives likes the music and decides that she likes the individuals in the band because of the music and their shared interest. And by doing this, she's able to give this explicit attitude towards Scott Pilgrim and the band. And this attitude, of course, is her excitement towards it because since she likes the same music as them, she's able to like them and show it based on her explicit attitude.
Implicit attitudes are actions that are completely unintentional and unaware of, made by one character towards another character. One example of implicit attitude from this movie is when Scott Pilgrim starts to develop feelings for another woman named Ramona Flowers and starts to forget about his original girlfriend, Knives Chow, which has a big impact on their relationship as Scott begins to feel remorse and feeling bad about what he did. So, for the character himself, Scott Pilgrim did develop self knowledge of their attitude as he realized that what he did was wrong and he should have broken everything off with Knives Chow before starting to fall in love with Ramona Flowers.
So identities and emotion. First of all, identity is defined as a set of meaning or rules applied to an individual in a social setting or about their social roles in that setting. And also, what does it mean to be that identity or person in that setting? So sometimes these perception of identities can equal the identity standards, or sometimes they can go against identity standards. However, when a perception of someone's identity in a setting fits the identity standard of that identity, then they are more likely to receive a positive response from their peers. And this will help them reinforce their identity. So you see this a lot, especially in the show, just like Scott Pilgrim and Self Knowledge and Attitudes, where these identities are reinforced because you're being around people who agree that someone's identity fits the standard. And so this all correlates between identity standards, input, compare character, and output. So identity standards is basically what does it mean to be a certain identity situation. Now, these identity standards are always there. Then you have input from others, and this is about perception of what the perception of the group thinks of that identity. And then you have the comparator. Now, this compares the inputs of these identity standards from the individuals in the group, and they compare them with the perceived meaning. Now, the output is basically the difference. Now, the output calculates the difference between the perception of identity and the actual identity standard. And this is why people change their behavior so they can counteract this discrepancy and reduce it.
An example for identities and emotion from this movie is where Scott Pilgrim experiences deflection for the first time. This happens when his old girlfriend, Knives Chow, tries to kiss another man in front of him in order to get back at him for what he did to her by dumping her and leaving her for another woman named Ramona Flowers. This is where Scott Pilgrim starts to realize things have started to change and he doesn't feel the same way about her as he used to anymore. Although it wasn't something that he intentionally meant to do, his ex-girlfriend Knives Chow was trying to show that she still wanted him and was using deflection in order to get back at him.
Status and group relations. This consists of the status characteristic theory, which involves scope conditions and also predictions of certain characteristics. It assumes that standards are systematically biased towards particular members of a certain group. This gives certain individuals higher status and other individuals lower status. Now, members in this group will form expectations based on the characteristics of others. The predictions are that these higher status individuals are more likely to reject the influence of other individuals. And this is by Cornell and Ridgway. Now, also, an emergence of a structure of power and order comes into play in this group as certain tasks are given to certain members of certain status. Now, you also have diffuse status in a group, and this is where more general characteristics such as race, gender, and education level, something very broad. And in the movie, the gender of the drummer in the band is female, while the remaining individuals are male. And males are seen as high honor, high self-esteem, and usually have a higher value in social studies compared to females. Because of this, the female in the band was not recognized in the band's name as the band's name was Boys. In addition to this, the crowd seemed as if they were chanting solely for the males of the band, while the female in the band, the drummer, was set aside.
For status and group relations, one of the examples we used for diffuse status was musical and gender. The reason for that is because in the band that played at the club called Club Rocket in the movie, the male characters in the band were getting much more of the cheers rather than the female drummer, who was kind of disregarded and she wasn't as valued as much as the male performers. A perfect example of inequality was present since no one seemed to really notice the female drummer, and everybody was kind of just cheering on more for the male players, the singers, the guitarists, and had forgotten about the female character that was also a part of their band. Due to inequality occurring, the outcome of the interaction did support SCT predictions.
Social exchange structure. So, social behavior is an outcome of different exchanges, and there's 4 different types of exchanges that can occur. Now, exchanges usually happen because it benefits one individual or it makes the cost of something less. So the 4 different types is reciprocal, negotiated, general, and productive. In a reciprocal exchange, this is where individuals will perform acts for each other without necessarily knowing if they're going to get something in return. And in a negotiated exchange, two or more actors will engage in a joint decision process. And this means that they both, or if it's more than 2, will reach an agreement about the terms of the exchange. So they know right around what they're going to receive and what they're going to give. In a general exchange, this exchange does not necessarily mean it's reciprocal to one person. This is where a person will exchange information to another person in hopes that that person will exchange it to another person. It does not have a direct effect on the first person giving the information. Now, productive exchange is where all actors and participants in a group will contribute the same amount of effort to each other. This way, it's a joint benefit for all group members.
An example of social exchange structure from this movie is when Scott Pilgrim and his girlfriend Ramona Flowers run into Ramona's ex-girlfriend named Roxy, who still has feelings for Ramona. In this scene, Roxy attempts to fight Scott to prevent him from dating Ramona as she still has feelings for Ramona. The resource in this exchange is intangible as love is not something that can be physically touched and or grabbed, and it is finite as love will eventually come to an end someday, and it's not something that will last forever.
Individuals in a social setting will learn behaviors of how they want to act and how they're supposed to act based on these identity standards that are there in their group. And these identity standards are there, and people will predict the way someone's supposed to act, which is why certain individuals will change their behaviors and or will learn new behaviors to counteract their old ones. Now, this all predicts how they, of course, engage with one another, if they like each other, if they just feel like they don't work. And this is all this could be based on the status of the individual. If they have higher status, they're going to see that they're going to interact better with other people of higher status, and so on and so forth, unless an individual has diffuse status, and that is affected. Now, another factor about this is the way they engage with one another. There's 4 different types, as I stated before, and this also varies among group members of which works better for them, and also what the task is, what they're trying to complete. And they will use different exchanges to work with this.